What if the real reason you want to give up on English isn't the language, but the story you keep telling yourself? In this video, I'll share how I arrived in Arizona with a broken heart, struggled to speak even simple English, and slowly rebuilt my life through love, family, and courage, one small sentence at a time. Stay with me, this story might change yours too. Desert beginning again. That question hit me one dry, silent morning in Arizona, where the sky looked endless and my confidence felt exactly the opposite. If you've ever sat there, staring at a simple sentence like, "How are you?" and somehow still felt lost, then you're already inside my story. I didn't come to Arizona with a dream. I came with a suitcase, a broken marriage, and a brain that refused to cooperate every time I tried to speak English. You know that feeling when your mind understands just enough to hurt, but not enough to respond? Yeah, that was me. Every single day. The funny thing is, your brain isn't actually bad at English. It's just dramatic. Neuroscience says when you feel embarrassed or afraid, your amygdala, the emotional alarm system, goes into overdrive. It treats a simple conversation like a life or death situation. So when someone asks, "Where are you from?" your brain doesn't hear a question. It hears danger. And suddenly, even the word Vietnam feels like a tongue twister. That's exactly how I felt when I first arrived. I remember standing in a small grocery store, holding a bottle of water, trying to ask, "How much is this?" Simple, right? But my mouth went dry. My heart started racing like I was about to give a speech in front of 1,000 people. And instead of speaking, I smiled awkwardly, nodded, and paid whatever the cashier said. Walking out of that store, I felt something heavier than embarrassment. It was the quiet voice in my head saying, "You don't belong here." And honestly, that voice is dangerous. Not because it's loud, but because it sounds like truth. Maybe you've heard that voice too. Here's the twist. It's not truth. It's just a habit. Psychologists call it negative self-narrative. Basically, your brain loves repeating old stories, even if they hurt you. If you've failed before, it builds a script. I'm bad at English. Then it replays it every time you try again. The more you believe it, the more your brain filters reality to prove it right. Miss one word? See, you're terrible. Forget a sentence? Proof again. But what if the story is wrong? That's the question that started everything for me. Not in a classroom, not from a teacher, but from a quiet moment, sitting alone in a small apartment in Arizona, watching the sunset paint the desert orange and gold. It was beautiful. And I realized something strange. Beauty doesn't need perfect grammar. So why did I? That night, I made a decision that sounded almost too simple to work. I would stop trying to speak perfect English. Instead, I would speak slow English, broken English, honest English. I started with the smallest sentences. I am tired. I feel sad. Today is hot. Not impressive. Not fluent, but real. And here's where something interesting happened. When you simplify language, your brain relaxes. Cognitive science shows that reducing complexity lowers mental load, which helps you access words faster. In normal language, when you stop trying to sound smart, you actually speak better. The next day, I went back to that same grocery store. Same aisle. Same kind of silence. But this time, I didn't wait for confidence. I just spoke. How much this? Was it perfect? Not even close. But it worked. The cashier smiled, answered slowly, and for the first time, I understood everything. That moment didn't change my life overnight. But it changed something more important. My direction. You see, motivation doesn't come first. Action does. That's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're tired, discouraged, or ready to quit. But research in behavioral psychology proves it. Small actions create momentum, and momentum creates motivation, not the other way around. So if you're waiting to feel ready to practice English, you might be waiting forever. That's the trap I almost fell into. Living in Arizona also taught me something unexpected about culture. Everything felt different. The way people smiled at strangers. The way they said, "How are you?" without expecting a real answer. The way conversations were short, light, and sometimes confusingly polite. At first, I thought I needed better English to understand Americans. But slowly I realized I needed to understand people. Language is not just words. It's emotion, timing, culture, and connection. You can say the perfect sentence and still feel distant. Or you can say something simple, even imperfect, and feel understood. That realization hit me one evening when a stranger held the door open for me and said, "Have a good one." I froze for a second. Good what? Good day? Good night? Good life? I smiled and replied, "You too." And somehow that was enough. That's when I started seeing English differently. Not as a test, not as a performance, but as a bridge. A messy, imperfect, sometimes shaky bridge, but still a bridge. And here's the part most people don't tell you. Learning English won't fix your life, but it will change how you experience it. For me, it started with survival. Then it became curiosity. And soon it became something else entirely. Because somewhere between those small sentences and awkward smiles, something unexpected was waiting for me in Arizona. Not just a new language, but a new chapter. And maybe a second chance at love. Funny how life works, right? You come looking for words and end up finding a story. And trust me, this story is just getting started. Because the real challenge wasn't speaking English. It was learning how to believe I deserved to be heard. Broken marriage, broken words. What hurts more, losing someone you love, or losing your voice after they're gone? That question followed me everywhere in Arizona, in the quiet kitchen, in the empty bedroom. Even in the middle of simple English sentences I couldn't finish. If you've ever felt like your confidence disappeared at the same time as your relationship, then you already understand the silence I was living in. Before I came to the United States, I believed something very common and very dangerous. I believed that love would make everything easier. Easier life. Easier emotions. Even easier English. Because when someone understands you, you don't have to try so hard, right? Turns out, that belief has a hidden cost. When my marriage started breaking apart, it didn't happen in one big, dramatic moment. It happened slowly, quietly, like a sentence that fades before you finish it. Conversations became shorter, then colder, then non-existent. And here's the strange part. The less we talked, the harder it became for me to speak at all, even in English, even with other people. Psychologists call this emotional shutdown. When your brain experiences repeated stress in relationships, it starts protecting you by reducing expression. In simple terms, your brain says, Talking didn't work before, so let's stop trying. So I stopped. Not completely, of course. I still said things like, okay, fine, or I understand. But those weren't real sentences. They were shields. Safe, short, and empty. And the more I used them, the more my world shrank. Have you noticed this? When your vocabulary is small, your life feels small too. Not because you're less intelligent, but because you have fewer tools to express what's inside you. It's like trying to paint a sunset with only one color. That's exactly how I felt at the end of my marriage. There were so many emotions, sadness, anger, confusion, regret, but I didn't have the words to explain them. Not in my native language. And definitely not in English. So instead, I stayed quiet. And silence is comfortable at first. It protects you from mistakes, from judgment, from embarrassment. But over time, it becomes something else. A cage. I remember one specific moment that still feels heavy when I think about it. We were sitting at the table, eating dinner.
No phones. No TV.
Just two people who used to love each other, now sharing silence like strangers.
I wanted to say something.
Anything. I feel lonely. I miss us. Can we try again? But those sentences stayed inside my head. And what came out instead? Do you want more rice? That was the moment I realized something painful. It wasn't just my relationship that was broken. It was my ability to communicate. And when the marriage finally ended, I thought things would get easier. No more tension. No more silence at the table. No more pretending. But I was wrong. Because the silence didn't disappear. It followed me all the way to Arizona. Living alone in a new country sounds exciting in movies. New life. New opportunities. Fresh start. But reality is quieter.
Slower.
Sometimes unbearably still. There were days I didn't speak to anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. And this is where many people give up on learning English. Not because it's too hard, but because it becomes emotionally connected to failure. Every mistake reminds you of something deeper. Something personal. You're not just forgetting a word. Neuroplasticity means your brain can rewire itself based on new experiences. Even after stress. Even after heartbreak. In other words, just because your voice was quiet before doesn't mean it has to stay that way. The problem is most people try to rebuild confidence the wrong way. They wait. They wait to feel better. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel confident again. But confidence doesn't come from waiting. It comes from doing something small, badly, and surviving it. That realization didn't hit me in a big, dramatic moment. It came quietly like most important truths do. One morning, I was making coffee. The kind of morning where everything feels heavy, for no clear reason. I turned on a simple English podcast, not to learn, just to hear another human voice. The speaker said one sentence that stayed with me. You don't find your voice. You build it. At first, I didn't fully understand it. But later that day, I tried something different. Instead of avoiding English, I started talking to myself. Out loud. Slowly. Awkwardly. I am making coffee. It smells good. I feel tired today. Was it strange? Absolutely. If someone had seen me, they might have thought I was losing my mind. But something surprising happened. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard, even if the only person listening was me. And here's what's fascinating. Studies show that speaking out loud, even to yourself, activates different areas of the brain compared to silent thinking. It strengthens memory, improves pronunciation, and builds fluency faster. In simple terms, your brain learns by hearing you speak, not by waiting silently. That small habit became my starting point. Not a classroom, not a textbook, not a perfect plan. Just a quiet kitchen in Arizona and a person who decided to try again. But here's the twist I didn't expect. As I slowly rebuilt my voice, something else started to change too. My heart. Because when you begin to express yourself again, even in simple English, you don't just communicate better.
You feel more alive.
And when you feel alive, you become open. Open to conversations. Open to people. Open to possibilities you didn't even notice before. Including one possibility I never thought I would face again. Love. But this time, it wouldn't come with perfect words. It would start with something much simpler. A smile.
A mistake.
And a sentence I almost didn't say.
Funny, right?
Sometimes life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just gives you a moment and waits to see if you'll speak. Lonely nights, slow English. Have you ever noticed nights feel longer when you don't have anyone to talk to? Not just physically longer, but emotionally heavier, like time itself slows down just to sit with you. That's exactly what my nights felt like in Arizona. Quiet.
Wide.
Almost too honest. And if you've ever tried to learn English when your heart feels empty, you know it's not just about language anymore. It's about survival. During the day, I could distract myself.
Grocery shopping.
Walking outside. Watching people live their lives. But at night, there was nowhere to hide.
No noise.
No movement. Just me, my thoughts, and a language I still couldn't fully use. That's when something strange started happening. I didn't just feel lonely. I started feeling invisible. Not because people couldn't see me, but because I couldn't express myself clearly enough to be truly understood. And here's something most people don't talk about. When you can't communicate, your brain starts to disconnect socially. It's a psychological response. Your mind says, if I can't express myself, maybe I shouldn't try. So you withdraw. You stop starting conversations. You stop answering fully. You stop being you. And slowly, your world becomes quieter and smaller. That was me, sitting on the edge of my bed at 10 p.m., staring at my phone, scrolling without purpose. Not because I was interested, but because silence felt louder than noise. Then one night, I tried something different. Not because I was motivated. Not because I had a plan. But because I was tired of feeling stuck. I opened a simple English story video. Slow voice. Easy words. Nothing impressive. The kind of content most people would skip because it feels too basic. But here's the twist. Basic is exactly what my brain needed. The narrator spoke slowly. Today, I feel tired. I walk in the park. The sky is blue. At first, I almost laughed. This is too easy, I thought. I need something more advanced. But then I noticed something unexpected. I understood everything. Not 60%. Not guessing. Not struggling. 100%. And in that moment, something shifted. You see, your brain releases dopamine not when things are hard, but when you succeed at something meaningful. It's the reward chemical, the motivation fuel. And for the first time in a long time, my brain felt rewarded while learning English. That's when I realized something most learners get wrong. We think difficulty equals progress, but actually clarity creates progress. So, I made a small rule for myself. Every night, I would listen to slow English stories.
Not fast.
Not complicated. Just clear, simple, human language. At first, I only listened. Then a few nights later, I started repeating. Quietly. Slowly. Almost whispering. I feel tired. I walk alone. The night is quiet. It felt strange at first. Like I was acting in a movie no one was watching. But something powerful was happening behind the scenes. When you repeat sentences out loud, your brain starts building automatic pathways. It's called muscle memory for language. You're not just learning words, you're training your mouth, your ears, and your brain to work together. And here's the best part. You don't need confidence to start. You build confidence by starting. Those nights became my secret classroom. No pressure.
No judgment.
No fear of mistakes. Just me and a voice learning how to exist again. But loneliness still came. Of course it did. Learning English doesn't magically fix emotions. Some nights were harder than others. There were nights I paused the video halfway through because the silence inside me felt too loud. There were nights I didn't want to repeat anything. I just wanted to disappear into sleep. And that's normal. Your brain doesn't heal in a straight line. It moves in waves. Some days you feel strong. Other days, everything feels heavy again. But here's what changed everything for me. I stopped asking, do I feel like practicing today? And started asking, can I do one sentence? Just one. Not 10. Not perfect. Just one. And almost every time the answer was yes. That's how habits are built. Not through motivation, but through small, repeatable actions. Behavioral science calls this the minimum effort rule. When a task feels small, your brain doesn't resist it. So one sentence becomes 2. 2 becomes 5. And suddenly you're speaking. That's exactly what happened to me. Weeks passed, and something subtle began to change. I wasn't just listening anymore. I was understanding faster, responding quicker, feeling less afraid. And the most surprising part? My thoughts started changing too. Instead of thinking, I can't speak English, I caught myself thinking, I can try. That one word, try, changed everything. Because can't closes doors. But try opens them. One night, while repeating a simple story, I said a sentence that felt different. I am ready to talk. I paused. Ready? Was that true? I didn't feel fully ready. Not confident. Not fluent. But maybe, just maybe, I was less afraid than before. And sometimes that's enough. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to speak anyway. That night, I went to sleep with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness. Not excitement. But something quieter and more powerful. Hope. And here's the funny thing about hope. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Just like those slow English stories that slowly, quietly brought my voice back to life. But what I didn't know yet was that those small sentences, those lonely nights, and that quiet practice were about to lead me into a real conversation. Not with a screen, not with myself, but with someone who would change everything. And trust me, I almost didn't say a word. A voice I was afraid to use. What's the worst thing that could happen if you say one simple sentence wrong? Sounds like a small question, right? But your brain treats it like a disaster. In Arizona, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't afraid of English. I was afraid of being seen trying. And if you've ever stayed quiet just to avoid embarrassment, then you already know how powerful that fear can be. Here's the strange truth about fear. It rarely shows up as something dramatic. It doesn't always say, "Don't speak." Instead, it whispers softer, more reasonable excuses. Maybe later. I need more practice. I'll speak when I'm ready. And just like that, you stay silent. That was my pattern. Even after weeks of practicing slow English at night, even after I started understanding more, something inside me still held back when it came to real conversations. Because practicing alone is safe, but real life isn't. One afternoon, I decided to sit in a small park near my apartment. The kind of place where people walk their dogs, drink coffee, and casually say hi to strangers like it's the easiest thing in the world. I sat on a bench, holding a cup of coffee I didn't even want, just to feel like I belonged there. That's when it happened. A man walked by, smiled, and said, "Nice weather today, huh?" Simple sentence. Normal situation. But inside my head, chaos. My brain started racing. What did he say exactly? Should I respond? What if I say it wrong? What if he doesn't understand me? What if it's awkward? And then silence. I smiled. I nodded. I said nothing. He kept walking. And just like that, the moment was gone. Now, if you've ever experienced this, you know the worst part isn't the silence itself. It's what comes after. The replay. Your brain replays the moment like a movie you didn't act in. You think of the perfect response, 10 seconds too late. Yeah, it's beautiful today. I love this weather. Yes, very warm. Suddenly, you're fluent in your imagination. But in real life, nothing. Psychologists call this the performance gap. The difference between what you know and what you actually do under pressure. And the reason is simple. Anxiety blocks access to your memory. In other words, you don't forget English. Your brain just locks it away when you're nervous. That realization hit me hard. Because it meant one thing. The problem wasn't my ability. It was my fear. And fear, unlike vocabulary, doesn't disappear by studying more. It disappears by facing it. But here's the catch. Most people try to face fear in big, dramatic ways. They force themselves into long conversations, complex sentences, or situations they're not ready for. That usually backfires. Your brain gets overwhelmed, confirms the fear, and says, "See? I told you this was dangerous." So, I tried something different. Something smaller. Something almost ridiculous. The next day, I went back to that same park. Same bench. Same coffee. Same quiet hope. But this time, I gave myself one simple mission. Not to have a conversation. Not to impress anyone. Just to say one sentence. That's it. One sentence, no matter how small. Minutes passed. People walked by. Dogs barked. The world moved like usual. And then another moment came. A woman walking her dog stopped nearby. The dog looked at me, wagging its tail like we were already friends. She smiled and said, "He's very friendly." There it was again. a chance, a simple sentence. And this time, I didn't wait. I didn't overthink. I just spoke. He is very cute. Was it perfect?
No.
Did I feel nervous? Absolutely. But something amazing happened. She smiled wider and said, "Thank you." He loves meeting people. And just like that, we were talking. Not a deep conversation. Not a long exchange. Just a few simple sentences. But for me, it felt like breaking through a wall I had built myself. That moment taught me something powerful. Confidence doesn't come before action. It comes after surviving the action. Your brain learns from evidence. When you speak and nothing bad happens, your brain updates its belief. Oh, this is safe. And the next time, it feels slightly easier. That's how fear shrinks. Not all at once, but little by little. Over the next few days, I kept repeating this one-sentence rule. At the store, "Thank you." At the cafe, "Small coffee, please." At the park, "Nice dog." Simple, short, real. And slowly, something started to change. Not just in my English, but in my identity. I stopped seeing myself as someone who can't speak, and started seeing myself as someone who is learning. That shift might sound small, but it changes everything. Because identity drives behavior. If you believe you're bad at English, you avoid speaking. If you believe you're learning, you accept mistakes. And here's the truth most people don't realize. Mistakes are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of progress. Every wrong sentence means you tried. Every awkward pause means you showed up. Every imperfect word means you're moving forward. But your brain, it prefers comfort. It prefers silence. Because silence feels safe. Even when it keeps you stuck. That's the real danger. Not making mistakes, but staying quiet. One evening, after another small conversation at the park, I sat down and thought about how far I had come. Not fluency, not perfection, but courage. Just enough courage to use my voice. And in that quiet moment, I realized something unexpected. My voice wasn't as weak as I thought. It was just unused, like a muscle that hadn't been trained. And now, slowly, it was getting stronger. But what I didn't know yet was that this small habit, this simple act of speaking one sentence, was about to lead me into a conversation that would feel very different. Because this time it wouldn't just be about English. It would be about connection. And maybe something more. And trust me, I almost let fear win again. Meeting him unexpectedly. Have you ever noticed the moment you stop trying to impress people is exactly when someone starts noticing you? I didn't expect anything special that day in Arizona. No big plans. No life-changing goals. Just another quiet afternoon. Another small attempt to say one simple sentence out loud. But sometimes, life doesn't wait until you're ready. It shows up right in the middle of your unfinished sentence. It started like any normal day. Same park. Same bench. Same, I'll just say one sentence mindset. At this point, my routine felt almost automatic.
Sit down. Breathe.
Watch people. Wait for a moment. Speak something simple. Nothing dramatic. But this time something was different. Not outside. Inside. Because, without realizing it, I had changed. A few weeks earlier, I would sit there hoping no one talked to me.
Now,
A small part of me actually wanted someone to say something. Not because I was confident, but because I was curious. Curious if I could handle it. Curious if I could respond. Curious if I was ready. That's when I heard a voice. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up. A man stood next to the bench, holding a coffee, wearing a relaxed smile like he wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. And just like that, time slowed down again. But this time, something inside me didn't panic the same way. It hesitated, but it didn't freeze. No, that's free. 2 short words. Not perfect pronunciation. Not strong confidence. But enough. He sat down. And for a few seconds, we both just looked ahead, watching people walk by like strangers who happened to share the same moment. Then he said, "I come here a lot. It's peaceful." Now here's where things usually went wrong for me. This is the moment when conversations either continue or quietly die. Your brain starts calculating. What do I say next? How do I respond? What if I mess up? But something surprising happened. Instead of thinking about the perfect sentence, I remembered my rule. 1 sentence. Just one. I like this place too. Simple.
Honest. Real.
He nodded, smiled, and then he kept talking. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't have to carry the whole conversation. Most people will meet you halfway if you just open the door. We talked about small things. The weather, the park, how hot Arizona can get in the summer. Nothing deep, nothing complicated. But every sentence felt like a small victory. Not because it was impressive, but because it was happening. In real life. With a real person. And here's what's interesting. When you focus on meaning instead of perfection, your brain works differently. Instead of searching for the correct grammar, it searches for connection. And connection is faster, more natural, more human. That's why children learn language so quickly. They're not trying to sound smart. They're trying to be understood. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, he asked a simple question. "Where are you from?" A question I had heard many times before. A question that used to make me nervous. But this time, I answered without overthinking. "I'm from Vietnam. I'm new here." He smiled. "Welcome. Arizona can be a bit intense at first." I laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. Because finally, I understood not just his words but his meaning. And for a brief moment, I forgot I was learning English. I was just talking. That moment matters more than you think. Because when you forget you're learning, you start actually learning. Your brain relaxes. Your memory opens. Your responses become more natural. It's like driving a car. At first, you think about every movement, but over time, it becomes automatic. Language works the same way. We kept talking for a few more minutes. Then came a pause. Not an awkward one. Just a natural break. And that's when he said something unexpected. "I like talking to you. It's easy." Easy? That word stayed in my mind. Because for me, nothing about speaking English felt easy. But maybe from the outside, it didn't look as difficult as it felt inside. And that's another important truth. People don't see your fear the way you feel it. They see your effort. They see your courage. They see you trying. And most of the time, that's enough. Before he left, he stood up and said, "Maybe I'll see you here again." I nodded. Maybe. One word. But this time, it didn't feel small. It felt open. After he walked away, I sat there for a while, replaying the conversation in my head. But this time, it wasn't regret. It wasn't "I should have said this," or "I missed that word." It was something new.
Pride.
Not big pride. Not loud pride. Just a quiet feeling that said, "You did it." And here's what's fascinating. That conversation didn't change my English level overnight. I didn't suddenly become fluent. I still made mistakes. I still paused. I still searched for words. But something more important changed. My relationship with speaking. Before, speaking English felt like a test. Now it felt like a possibility. And that shift, it changes everything. Because when something feels possible, you show up differently. You try more. You risk more. You grow more. That day wasn't about meeting someone special. At least not yet. It was about meeting a new version of myself. A version that could speak. A version that could connect. A version that didn't run away from small moments anymore. But life has a funny way of building something bigger from very small beginnings. Because that maybe he said, it didn't stay a maybe for long. And the next time we met, it wouldn't just be small talk. It would be something deeper. Something a little more uncomfortable. And maybe something a little more dangerous. Because connection is easy at the surface. But real connection? That requires something else. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to give. Honesty. Small talks, big changes. Why is it that the smallest conversations sometimes change your life more than the big ones? Not the deep, emotional talks you imagine, but those short, simple exchanges that feel almost forgettable. That's exactly what started happening to me in Arizona. What I thought were just practice sentences slowly became something else. Something bigger. And if you've ever underestimated the power of small talk, this part might surprise you. A few days after that first meeting, I went back to the park.
Same time.
Same bench. But this time, something felt different.
Not the place.
Not the people.
Me.
Because now I wasn't just sitting there hoping to survive a conversation. I was wondering if I would see him again. And that thought alone changed my behavior. Psychology has a simple explanation for this. When your brain attaches emotion to an activity, your motivation increases naturally. It's called emotional anchoring. Before, English was connected to fear and embarrassment. Now it was slowly connecting to curiosity and maybe even excitement. That's a powerful shift. Because your brain doesn't chase difficulty. It chases meaning. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to look calm, even though my attention kept drifting toward every person walking by. Then I heard it again. "Hey, you're back." I looked up. Same relaxed smile. Same calm energy. And suddenly, I felt nervous again. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of fear. It wasn't fear of speaking. It was something else. The kind of nervousness you feel when something matters. "Yeah, I come here often," I said. Was that sentence perfect? Not really. But it didn't need to be. Because the conversation didn't stop. That's something important to understand. Fluency is not about perfect sentences. It's about keeping the conversation alive. We started talking again. Same simple topics at first. Weather.
Work.
Daily life. But slowly, the conversation started getting longer. Not because my English suddenly improved, but because I stopped trying to control every word. And here's something fascinating. When you stop focusing on grammar and start focusing on meaning, your brain enters a different mode. Linguists call it communicative competence. It means you prioritize connection over correctness. In simple terms, you care more about being understood than being perfect. And that's when real progress begins. One afternoon he asked me, "So, what do you do here?" A simple question. But this time, I didn't just answer with one sentence. I tried two. I work part-time, and I study English. There was a small pause, not because I was stuck, but because I was thinking, should I say more? Should I stop here? That moment is where growth happens, because your brain is standing at a door. On one side, safety. On the other, possibility. And you get to choose. So I added one more sentence. I want to speak better, but it's hard. He nodded. Yeah, learning a language takes time. That response might sound simple, but to me, it felt like relief. Because he didn't correct me. He didn't judge me. He understood me. And that's when I realized something important. Most people are not waiting for you to be perfect. They're just waiting to understand you. That realization changed how I spoke. I started taking small risks, adding one more sentence, trying one new word, even if I wasn't sure it was correct. And guess what? Sometimes I made mistakes. Of course I did. But nothing bad happened. No one left. No one walked away. The conversation continued. And every time that happened, my brain learned something new. This is safe. That's how confidence is built. Not through success, but through survived mistakes. Over time, our conversations became more natural. We started talking about deeper things. Not too deep at first. Just small personal details. Favorite food. Daily routines. Funny experiences. And then one day he asked something different. Do you like living here? That question felt heavier. Because the answer wasn't simple. I paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I felt something. Honesty. And honesty is harder than vocabulary. I think yes, I said slowly. But sometimes I feel alone. There it was. A real sentence. Not perfect, but real. And something changed in that moment. The conversation slowed down. Not in a bad way. In a deeper way. He didn't respond immediately. He looked at me, then said softly, yeah, that happens. No big advice. No dramatic reaction. Just understanding. And somehow, that felt more powerful than any perfect English sentence. Because language is not just about words. It's about feeling seen. That moment stayed with me. Because it showed me something I hadn't fully realized before. English wasn't just helping me communicate. It was helping me connect. And connection changes everything. After that, I started looking forward to these conversations. Not as practice, but as moments. Moments where I could be myself. Even if that self was still learning, still imperfect, still growing. And here's the interesting part. The more I spoke, the less I translated in my head. The more I listened, the more I understood without effort. That's a sign your brain is adapting. Moving from learning mode to using mode. And that's where real fluency begins. But with that progress came a new challenge. Because as conversations became deeper, so did emotions. And when emotions get involved, things become less predictable, less safe, more real. One evening, as the sun started setting over the Arizona sky, painting everything in warm orange light, we sat there in a comfortable silence. Then he said something unexpected. "I'm glad I met you." Simple words, but they carried weight. And suddenly,
I didn't know what to say.
not because I didn't understand, but because I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Vulnerability. And that's where things get complicated. Because speaking English is one thing, but opening your heart in another language, that's something else entirely. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Not yet. Cultural gaps and warm hearts. Have you ever said something completely normal and suddenly felt like you were from another planet? Not because your English was wrong, but because the meaning didn't land the way you expected. That's when I realized in Arizona, learning English wasn't just about words. It was about culture. And culture can confuse you in ways grammar never will. At this point, our conversations were becoming more frequent.
Not every day.
Not planned, but often enough that it felt familiar. And familiarity is dangerous in a good way, because when something feels familiar, you start to relax. You stop overthinking every sentence. You stop preparing every response. You just speak. And that's when cultural differences start showing up. One afternoon, we were walking slowly through the park. The sun wasn't too hot, the air felt light, and the conversation was easy. He asked, "How was your day?" Now, if you're like me, you might take that question seriously. Because in many cultures, when someone asks that, they actually want to know. So, I answered honestly. I felt a little sad today. Work was stressful, and I didn't sleep well. I looked at him, expecting a deeper response. Maybe a question. Maybe concern. Maybe connection. But instead, he just nodded lightly and said, "Yeah, I get that.
Some days are like that."
And then he changed the topic.
Just like that.
At first, I felt confused. Did he not care? Did I say too much? Was my English wrong? But later, I realized something important. In American culture, "How are you?" or "How was your day?" is often a light question, not always an invitation for deep emotional sharing. It's not fake. It's just different. And this is where many English learners struggle, not with vocabulary, but with expectations. You understand the words, but not the intention behind them. And when intention gets lost, connection feels off. That moment taught me something I wish I had known earlier. Language is only 50% words. The other 50%? Context, tone, culture, timing. Without those, even perfect English can feel awkward. So instead of feeling embarrassed, I got curious. The next time he asked, "How was your day?" I tried something different.
Good.
A little busy, but okay.
Short. Light.
Simple. And guess what? The conversation flowed more naturally. That's when I understood something powerful. Adapting your communication style doesn't mean losing yourself. It means learning how to connect more effectively. And that's a skill,
Not a personality.
But cultural differences didn't stop there. Another time, we were talking about food. He asked, "What do you usually eat at home?" I started describing my meals.
Rice.
Vegetables.
Soup.
Simple everyday things. Then I added, I don't eat much fast food. It's not healthy. I meant it as a neutral statement, just sharing my habit. But he paused slightly, then smiled and said, yeah, I probably eat too much of that. That pause, that subtle shift, it made me realize something. In American culture, direct statements, especially about habits, can sometimes feel like judgment, even if you don't mean it that way. Again, not wrong, just different. And this is where emotional intelligence becomes part of language learning. It's not just what you say. It's how it might feel to the other person. So I adjusted, not by changing my truth, but by softening my expression. Next time I said, I try to eat simple food. It makes me feel better. Same meaning, different impact. And the conversation stayed warm. That's the goal. Not perfection. Connection. Over time, I started noticing patterns. People smiled more than they spoke deeply. Conversations started light before becoming meaningful. Silence wasn't always uncomfortable. It was just part of the flow. And slowly I began to adapt. But here's the interesting part. While I was learning their culture, he was also learning mine. One evening, we were sitting on the bench, watching the sunset. He asked, do you miss home? That question felt different. Not casual. Not light.
Real.
I nodded. Yes, I miss my family and the feeling of understanding everything. He didn't interrupt.
Didn't change the topic.
Just listened. And then he said something simple. That makes sense. That moment stayed with me. Because this time, the connection felt balanced. Not just me adjusting, but both of us meeting in the middle. And that's what real communication looks like. Not one person changing completely, but two people trying to understand each other. That's when language becomes more than a tool. It becomes a bridge. And bridges go both ways. But here's where things got more complicated. Because as our conversations became deeper, as we understood each other more, as the cultural gaps became smaller, something else started growing. Something I didn't expect. Or maybe something I was trying not to see. Because it's one thing to learn a language. It's another thing to feel something while learning it. And feelings? They don't follow grammar rules. They don't wait for you to be ready. They just show up. Quietly.
Slowly.
And then all at once. One evening, as we stood up to leave, he looked at me and said, I feel like I can talk to you easily. That word again. Easily. And this time, it meant more. Because now, it wasn't just about English. It was about connection. Real connection. And suddenly, I felt something I hadn't felt since my past relationship ended.
Hope.
But also,
fear.
Because hope opens doors. And fear reminds you what happened last time you walked through one. So, the question wasn't just about language anymore. It became something deeper. Something more personal. Was I ready to open up again? Not just my voice, but my heart? Learning love through language. What if learning English isn't just about speaking clearly, but about feeling brave enough to be understood? That question hit me harder than any grammar lesson ever could, right there in Arizona, where my sentences were still simple, but my emotions were becoming complicated. Because somewhere between how are you and I understand, something unexpected started to grow, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to name it. You see, learning a language is one thing. But learning how to express your feelings in that language, that's a completely different challenge. Up until now, I had been practicing safe English. Simple sentences, clear meanings, no emotional risk. I am tired. I like this place. I work part-time. These sentences were easy because they didn't require vulnerability. They didn't expose anything real. But love? Love doesn't work like that. Love asks for more. More honesty. More courage.
More words you're not sure how to say.
And that's exactly where I started to struggle again. Because as our conversations became deeper, I noticed something uncomfortable. I could talk about daily life. I could describe my routine. But when it came to feelings, I felt stuck. Like my vocabulary suddenly disappeared. One evening, we were sitting in the park, the sky slowly turning dark, the air cooler than usual. He asked, "What makes you happy?" Such a simple question. But my mind went blank. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't know how to say it. In that moment, I realized something important. You don't just learn a language. You learn how to be yourself in that language. And I wasn't fully there yet. So I did what I always did before. I simplified. I like quiet time and walking. Was that the full truth? Not really, but it was a start. He smiled and said, "Yeah, I can see that." And the conversation continued. But inside, I felt something. A small frustration. Not because I failed, but because I knew I had more to say. And this is where many learners stop growing. Not at grammar, not at vocabulary, but at emotion. Because expressing feelings in another language feels risky. You might say it wrong. You might sound awkward. You might be misunderstood. But here's the truth. Even in your native language, feelings are messy. So expecting them to be perfect in English? That's unrealistic. And honestly, unnecessary. So I made another small decision. Just like I did with speaking one sentence. This time, I would practice one feeling. Just one. The next day, I tried something new. When he asked, "How was your day?" Instead of giving a safe answer, I added one small emotional word. "I feel a little tired today." That's it. One feeling. And something shifted. The conversation slowed down slightly. Not awkward. Just more real. He responded, "Long day." I nodded. And just like that, we were having a different kind of conversation. Not deeper in a dramatic way, but deeper in a human way. That's how emotional language works. You don't jump into big confessions. You build it one feeling at a time. Psychology supports this too. When you express emotions in words, your brain processes them better. It's called affect labeling. Studies show that simply naming your feelings can reduce emotional intensity and increase clarity. In simple terms, when you say how you feel better. And I started noticing that. The more I practiced expressing small emotions in English, the more natural it became. I feel happy. I feel nervous. I feel excited. Simple words, but powerful. Because now I wasn't just speaking English. I was living in it. And something else started happening too. Our connection changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically, but slowly, like everything else in this story. One evening, after a longer conversation than usual, we sat quietly for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just still. Then he said, "I enjoy talking with you." That sentence felt different this time, because now I understood not just the words, but the feeling behind them. And for a second, I didn't know what to say. My old pattern came back. Stay safe. Keep it simple. Don't risk too much. But then I remembered everything I had learned. One sentence. One feeling. Just try. So I said, slowly, "I feel comfortable with you." There it was. Not perfect, but real. And that moment changed everything. He smiled, not the casual smile I had seen before. Something softer, more present. "I feel the same," he said. And just like that, something unspoken became real. Not a big declaration. Not a dramatic moment. Just two people understanding each other. Through simple words. Through imperfect English. Through honesty.
And that's when it hit me.
You don't need advanced vocabulary to build a connection. You need courage.
Courage to speak.
Courage to feel. Courage to be seen even when your sentences aren't perfect. Because people don't fall in love with your grammar. They connect with your authenticity. And authenticity doesn't need perfection. It needs truth. But here's where things get complicated again. Because once you open that door, you can't pretend it's just practice anymore. Now there are feelings involved. Expectations. Possibilities. And with that comes risk. Because I had been here before. Different person. Different place. Same kind of hope. And we all know how that ended. So, the question wasn't just about English anymore. It became something deeper. More personal. More uncomfortable. Was I really ready to feel this again? To trust again? To open my heart in a language I was still learning? Because speaking is one thing. But loving in another language? That might be the hardest lesson of all. And I wasn't sure if I could pass it. Family, kids, and new dreams. What happens when your life doesn't just ask you to speak, but to belong? Not just in conversations, not just in a new country, but inside a family with routines, responsibilities, and people who expect you to show up as more than just someone learning English. That question became real for me in Arizona when something unexpected entered the story, not just love, but the possibility of a future with a family. Up until now, everything felt manageable. Small talks, simple feelings, short conversations.
I was learning step by step.
At my own pace. But life has a way of gently pushing you forward just when you start feeling comfortable. One afternoon, while we were walking through the park, he mentioned something casually. "I usually come here with my kids, but they're with their mom this week." Kids. That word landed differently. Not heavy, but not light either. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about two people talking anymore. There was more to his life. More layers. More reality. And my brain did what it always does when something new appears. It started asking questions. Can I handle this? Am I ready for this? Do I even understand enough English for this kind of life? Because talking to one person is one thing. Talking to a family is something else entirely. But I didn't react right away. I just nodded and said, "Oh, you have kids." Simple sentence. But inside, a lot was happening. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about it more than I expected. Not because I was afraid of children, but because I was afraid of not being enough. Not enough English. Not enough confidence. not enough clarity about my own life. And this is where things get interesting. When your life starts expanding, your language needs to expand too. You don't just need words for yourself anymore. You need words to connect with others. Different ages, different personalities, different expectations. That's a new level of communication. And honestly, it scared me because children don't simplify language for you. They speak naturally. They ask questions. They move fast. And your brain, it has to keep up. But at the same time, something inside me felt curious. Not fear. Not pressure.
Just curiosity.
A few days later, he asked, "Would you like to meet them sometime?" There it was. A simple invitation, but with a deeper meaning. I paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to be honest with him and with myself. "I'm a little nervous," I said. He smiled. "That's normal." And that response mattered more than I expected. Because again, I wasn't being judged. I wasn't being pushed. I was being understood.
So I said yes.
Not confidently. Not perfectly. But honestly. Yes, I would like that. The day came sooner than I expected. We met at a small park. Not the same one, but similar. Open space. Soft sunlight. A place where conversations could happen naturally. When I saw them, my first thought was simple. They're just kids. Not a test. Not a challenge. Just people. And that thought helped more than any English lesson ever could. He introduced me. Simple sentences.
Names.
Ages. I smiled and said, "Hi." That was it. One word. But it was enough to start. At first, the conversation was slow. Not because they were judging me, but because we were all adjusting. They were curious. I was careful. And somewhere in the middle we found a rhythm. Children have a different way of communicating. They don't focus on grammar. They focus on energy. If you're kind, they respond. If you're open, they connect. So I kept things simple. "How are you? Do you like school?" "That's cool." Short sentences. Clear meaning. And slowly something started to happen. They talked more. I understood more. We laughed a little. And suddenly it didn't feel like a difficult situation anymore. It felt natural. And here's something powerful. When you use language in real-life situations, especially emotional ones, your brain learns faster. It's called contextual learning. Instead of memorizing words, you attach them to experiences. So now, words weren't just words. They were moments, smiles, voices, connections. And that makes them easier to remember, easier to use, easier to feel. After that day, something changed again. Not dramatically, but quietly. My motivation became stronger. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to connect better with him, with his kids, with this new life that was slowly forming. That's a different kind of motivation. Not pressure. Purpose. And purpose is powerful. Because when you have a reason, you don't need discipline in the same way. You show up naturally. You try more. You care more. I started practicing English differently. Not just repeating sentences, but imagining real conversations. What would I say if they asked this? How can I explain this feeling? What words do I need to describe my day? That shift from abstract learning to real-life use changed everything. And slowly, I started feeling something I hadn't expected. Belonging. Not fully, not completely, but enough to feel possible. But here's the truth. With belonging comes responsibility. Because now it's not just about you anymore. It's about showing up, being present, being honest. And that brings new questions. Bigger questions. Not about English, but about life. Where is this going? What do I really want? Am I ready to build something again? Because love is one thing, but building a life, that's something else. And I could feel it. The story was changing, becoming more real, more serious, more meaningful. And with that came a quiet fear. Because every new beginning carries a memory of the past. And mine wasn't easy. So now, standing between what I had lost and what I might gain, I had to face something I had been avoiding. Not language, not culture, but choice. Because sooner or later, life asks you a simple question. Not in perfect grammar. Not in long sentences. Just one clear moment. Will you move forward or stay where it's safe? And I wasn't sure what my answer would be. Doubts, fears, and second chances. What if the hardest part isn't learning English, but deciding whether you deserve a second chance at happiness? That question stayed with me everywhere in Arizona. Not just in conversations, but in the quiet spaces between them. Because when life starts offering you something new, your past doesn't disappear. It gets louder. By now, everything looked good from the outside. I was speaking more, understanding better, connecting with people, even building something that felt real. But inside, it wasn't that simple. Because growth doesn't erase fear. It reveals it. And the more things started to feel meaningful, the conversations, the connection, the possibility of a future, the more my mind started going back to what had happened before. That's how the brain works. It's designed to protect you, not to make you happy. So when something reminds it of a past pain, it activates caution. Sometimes too much caution. I remember one evening very clearly. We were sitting in the park again, but this time the conversation felt different. Not awkward. Not uncomfortable. Just heavier. Because now, we both knew something had changed between us. It wasn't just casual anymore. And that's when your brain starts asking questions you can't ignore. What is this? Where is this going? Am I ready for this? He looked at me and asked, "Do you think you'll stay here long term?" A simple question, but not a simple answer. Because that question wasn't just about location. It was about commitment, about future, about choices I hadn't fully made yet. I paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I felt something rising inside me. Doubt. I don't know, I said slowly. I'm still figuring things out. That was the truth. But it wasn't the whole truth. Because the part one didn't say was louder. I'm afraid. Afraid of repeating the past. Afraid of trusting again. Afraid of building something and losing it. And here's the thing about fear. It doesn't always stop you immediately. Sometimes it waits. It lets you move forward just enough, and then it whispers. Are you sure? That whisper started showing up more often. In small moments. When he texted, I hesitated before replying. When we talked, I held back certain thoughts. When things felt good, I questioned them. That's the hidden effect of past pain. It teaches you to doubt even the good things. Psychologists call this emotional conditioning. Your brain associates similar situations with past outcomes. So even if this situation is different, your brain reacts as if it's the same. In simple terms, your past is trying to protect you from your future. But protection can become limitation. And I was starting to feel that. Because part of me wanted to move forward.
To trust.
To open up. But another part wanted to stay safe.
To control.
To avoid risk. And those two parts? They don't work well together. One moves forward. The other pulls back. And you end up stuck. That's exactly how I felt. Not moving backward. Not moving forward. Just waiting. And waiting can feel safe. But it doesn't build anything. One day, after a quiet conversation, he asked something more direct. Can I ask you something honestly? I nodded. Of course. He looked at me, not casually this time. Seriously. Do you feel like you're holding back? That question. It didn't hit my ears. It hit my chest. Because the answer was obvious.
Yes.
But saying it? That required something I was still learning. Honesty. Real honesty. Not the safe version. Not the simple sentences. But the kind that exposes something deeper. I took a breath. Slow. Careful. I think yes, I said. I feel scared sometimes. There it was. Not perfect English. But perfect truth. And something changed in that moment. Not dramatically. But quietly. Because when you say what you're afraid of, it loses some of its power. That's not just emotional advice. It's science. When you name your fear, your brain reduces its intensity. It moves from the emotional center, amygdala, to the logical center, prefrontal cortex. In simple words, speaking your fear makes it smaller. He nodded.
Not surprised.
Not uncomfortable. Just understanding. That makes sense, he said. Everyone has a past. That sentence mattered more than I expected. Because he didn't try to fix it. Didn't push me. Didn't make it a problem. He accepted it. And that acceptance gave me space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to decide. And that's when I realized something important. A second chance doesn't mean forgetting your past. It means choosing differently because of it. But choosing differently requires courage. Not big, dramatic courage. Small, quiet courage. The kind that shows up in simple moments. Saying one more sentence. Sharing one more thought. Taking one small step forward. And I had already been practicing that. With English. With conversations. With life. So maybe I could do it here too. But here's the truth. Knowing what to do and actually doing it, two very different things. Because the next step wasn't about language anymore. It was about decision. Do I stay safe? Or do I try again? Do I protect myself? Or do I risk something real? And that's where things became clear. Because at some point, you realize something simple. Staying safe also has a cost. You avoid pain. But you also avoid connection. You avoid risk. But you also avoid growth. And slowly, that safety becomes another kind of loss. A quiet one. The kind you don't notice until it's too late. So there I was. Sitting in the same place where everything started. Same park. Same sky. Same person next to me. But a completely different question in front of me. Not, can I speak English? But can I choose again? And this time, I couldn't answer with just one sentence. Because this choice, it would change everything. Choosing love, choosing growth. What if the real decision isn't about love, but about who you become when you stop running from it? That question didn't come from him. It came from me, quietly, slowly, one evening in Arizona, when everything finally felt clear and uncomfortable at the same time. Because clarity doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it forces you to choose. By now, I couldn't pretend anymore. Not about my feelings. Not about my fear. Not about what was happening between us. Everything had grown beyond practice. Beyond just conversations.
Beyond maybe.
And that's where things get real. Because when something becomes real, it asks something from you. Not perfect English. Not perfect confidence. But a decision. And decisions are difficult, not because you don't know what to do, but because you know exactly what it might cost. That night, I went home and sat alone, like I used to in the beginning. Same quiet room, same stillness, but a completely different person sitting inside it, because now I had something to lose. And that changes everything. I started thinking about my past, not in a dramatic way, just honestly. What went wrong? What did I learn? What was I afraid of repeating? And here's the uncomfortable truth I had to face. It wasn't just the relationship that failed. It was also how I showed up in it. I avoided difficult conversations. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I waited instead of expressing. And suddenly I saw the pattern.
Not just in my past marriage,
but in my English journey too. Silence. Waiting. Avoiding mistakes. Trying to be ready before taking action. And that pattern keeps you stuck. Whether it's in love or language, that realization hit hard because it meant something simple. If I wanted a different outcome, I needed to make a different choice. Not later.
now.
Psychology calls this pattern interruption. When you recognize a repeating behavior and consciously choose a different response, your brain starts creating new neural pathways. In simple terms, you become someone new by acting differently. So I asked myself one honest question. Not, am I ready? But, what kind of person do I want to be? Someone who stays safe, or someone who tries? Someone who avoids risk, or someone who grows? And the answer was uncomfortable, because growth is never comfortable, but it's necessary. The next day, I went back to the park. Same place where everything started. But this time, I wasn't there to practice English. I was there to be honest. When he arrived, we sat down like usual. Casual.
Familiar.
But I could feel something inside me. A quiet pressure. Not fear. Not exactly. More like a decision waiting to be spoken. We talked for a few minutes. Small things. Normal things. But my mind was focused on one thing. Say it. Just say it. And this is where everything you've learned comes together. Not grammar. Not vocabulary. But courage. The same courage it took to say your first sentence. The same courage it took to speak when you were afraid. Now, it was time to use it again. I took a breath. Slow. Steady. And I spoke. I want to tell you something. He looked at me, attentive. Not rushed. Not distracted. Just present. I feel scared sometimes, I continued. but I also feel happy when I talk to you. This sentence wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Because this wasn't a test. It was a moment. I paused. Let the silence exist. Didn't rush to fill it. And then I added one more sentence. I want to try, but slowly. There it was. My choice. Not dramatic. Not perfect. But real. And something shifted in that moment. Not just in the conversation, but inside me. Because I had done something different. I didn't avoid. I didn't stay silent. I didn't wait. I spoke. And that's where growth happens. Not in perfect conditions, but in honest ones. He smiled. Not surprised. Not overwhelmed. Just understanding. That sounds good, he said. We can go slow. No pressure.
No expectations.
Just space. And that response mattered more than I expected. Because it showed me something important. The right people don't rush your process. They respect it. And suddenly, everything felt lighter. Not because all my fears disappeared, but because I wasn't hiding from them anymore. And that changes everything. Because when you stop hiding, you start living. After that conversation, something inside me felt different. Stronger. Not louder. Not more confident in a dramatic way. Just more grounded. Because I knew something now. I could speak. Not perfect English, but honest English. And honest English is enough. That realization goes beyond language. Because in life, too, you don't need perfect words. You need real ones. And I had finally started using them. But here's the interesting part. Choosing love doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It means everything becomes meaningful. More conversations. More emotions. More moments that require honesty. And with that comes growth. Real growth. The kind that changes how you think, how you speak, how you live. And slowly, I started seeing something clearly. This wasn't just about a relationship. It was about a new version of myself. Someone who speaks. Someone who feels. Someone who chooses. And that version? It didn't exist before Arizona. But now it was real. And the story wasn't ending. Not yet. Because every choice leads to something new. And this choice, it was just the beginning of something deeper, something fuller, something worth the risk. But before this story could truly close, there was one more thing waiting. Not a challenge, not a fear, but a quiet realization. The kind that only comes after you've walked through everything. And finally understand why it all happened. A happy ending in Arizona. What if everything you thought was the end was actually the beginning of the life you were meant to live? That question doesn't sound real when you're in pain. It sounds like something people say to feel better. But standing there in Arizona, after everything I had gone through, silence, fear, broken words, and second chances, I finally understood something simple and powerful. Nothing was wasted. Not the mistakes. Not the loneliness. Not even the moments I wanted to forget. Because every part of the journey built something. And now, for the first time, I could see it clearly. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. That's not how real stories work. There were still challenges. Still misunderstandings. Still days when English felt hard, when emotions felt confusing, when old fears tried to come back. But something had changed in a deeper way. I had changed. The person who once stayed silent in a grocery store now started conversations. The person who avoided expressing feelings now shared them, even if the sentences weren't perfect. The person who was afraid to try again had already taken the first step. And that's what a happy ending really looks like. Not perfection, but progress. One of the biggest changes came in the simplest moments. Morning conversations, short messages, small jokes that I actually understood and even replied to. At some point, I realized something almost unbelievable. I wasn't translating everything in my head anymore. I was thinking in English, not all the time, not perfectly, but enough to feel natural. And that's a huge milestone, because when you stop translating, you start living the language, not just learning it. That's when English becomes part of your life, not just something you study. But more importantly, I wasn't just speaking better. I was connecting better. With him, with his kids, with the people around me. And slowly, quietly, that connection turned into something stable. Something real. We didn't rush anything. We kept things simple. Honest. Step by step. Just like how I learned English. And that's the part that surprised me the most. The same method that helped me speak helped me build a relationship. Small actions. Consistency. Honesty over perfection. Because relationships, like language, don't need big, dramatic moments to grow. They need small, repeated efforts. And over time, those small efforts become something strong. There were moments I'll never forget. Simple dinners where I could follow the conversation without feeling lost. Afternoons in the park where silence felt comfortable, not awkward. Even small interactions with the kids, laughing, answering their questions, understanding their jokes. Those moments might seem normal to others. But to me, they were everything, because they represented something bigger. Belonging. Not perfect belonging, but real. And here's something important. Belonging doesn't come from speaking perfectly. It comes from showing up again and again as yourself. Even when your sentences are simple, even when you make mistakes, even when you're still learning, that's enough. One evening, we were sitting together, watching the sunset. The same kind of sunset I saw when I first arrived. But everything felt different. Back then, I saw beauty but felt alone. Now, I saw beauty and felt connected. He looked at me and said, "You've changed a lot since we first met." I smiled. Yeah, I think so. That sentence might sound simple, but it carried a whole story. A story of fear, turned into courage. Of silence, turned into voice. Of doubt, turned into choice. And here's the truth. I didn't just find love in Arizona. I found something more important. Myself. A version of myself that I didn't know existed before. A version that speaks, feels, tries, and doesn't run away from small moments anymore. Because those small moments, they build everything. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I had known earlier. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to wait. You just need to start. One sentence. One conversation. One honest moment. That's how everything begins. If you're watching this and feeling stuck, if you're tired of trying to learn English and thinking about giving up, let me tell you something simple. It's not about learning faster. It's about not stopping. Because every small effort counts. Every sentence matters. Every moment you choose to try build something you can't see yet. But one day you will. And maybe, just maybe, you won't just learn a language. You'll change your life. Funny how that works, right? You start by trying to say hello and end up finding a whole new world. So if you're still here, still listening, still trying, you're already closer than you think. And trust me, your story, it's not over. It's just getting started. Before you leave, let me ask you one honest question. What if your English journey is not failing? You're just quitting too early. This story didn't change because I became perfect. It changed because I kept going even when my sentences were broken, even when my confidence was low, even when I felt like I didn't belong. And maybe that's exactly where you are right now. So don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait to feel confident. Start with one sentence today. Just one. Because your voice matters. Even if it's low, even if it's simple, even if it's not perfect. If this story made you feel something, don't stop here. Hit subscribe for more real English stories, slow English practice, and listen and speak training designed for real life in the USA. Like the video to support the channel. Comment below. I will try again today. And make it real. Your second chance might be closer than you think. Don't miss it.